My hands shook as I reached for the chair, hoping just to sit with my own family. But before I could pull it closer, my mother's voice cut through the room. She pointed straight at me and said, "You don't deserve a seat at this table." Everyone froze. My siblings laughed. Relatives whispered. I stood there, humiliated. What they didn't know was that the daughter they pushed away that night would soon hold the power to change everything. And when I came back, no one at that table could look me in the eye. Ebel closed the door to her room and leaned against it, her body weak from holding back her tears all night. The voices and laughter from the dining room still echoed in her mind, especially her mother's words telling her she didn't deserve a seat at the table. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, her heart heavy with questions she couldn't answer. How could her own family treat her like a stranger? Her mind drifted back to all the times she had stood for them when no one else did. She remembered the months when her father lost his job and there was no food in the house. She was the one who worked small jobs and paid the bills, even skipping meals so her siblings could eat. She remembered saving Amal when he was about to be thrown out of school because of unpaid fees. She had borrowed money and taken extra work just to keep his education going. Yet today he mocked her in front of everyone. Her chest ached as she thought about her younger sister, who once fell sick. It was Ebel who stayed by her side in the hospital for nights without sleep, holding her hand and praying she would recover. No one else remembered those moments now. Instead of gratitude, all she received was rejection. The room felt smaller with every thought. She looked around at her simple belongings, a small table, a chair, and her books. Nothing about her life was extravagant, but she had always been content as long as her family was happy. Now she wondered if all her and expected too little. She had always believed family would stand by her, no matter what. But the harsh truth was now clear. The very people she protected were the ones breaking her spirit. Ebel buried her face in her hands, tears finally flowing freely. She wasn't crying just because of what her mother had said, but because the people she trusted most had turned her into a burden in their eyes. The same family she carried on her shoulders now acted as though she was the weight holding them down. That night, in the silence of her room, Ebel felt the sharp sting of betrayal more than anything else. It was a pain deeper than hunger, deeper than poverty. The pain of giving everything and being treated as if she was nothing. Ebel woke up the next morning with swollen eyes from crying all night. The pain was still there, but something inside her had shifted. She sat up slowly, wiping her face, and whispered to herself that she would never beg for a place in her family again. If they thought she was not worthy, then she would prove to herself that she was more than worthy. She had spent too many years trying to win their love, bending herself just to be accepted. Now she was done. She stood in front of the small mirror on her wall, studying her tired reflection. For the first time, she did not see weakness. She saw a woman who had survived storms bigger than insults. She saw someone who had carried responsibilities that weren't hers, yet never complained. That strength was her hidden power. Her family might not see it, but she felt it burning inside her like a flame. As she dressed for the day, memories of her sacrifices came back, but this time they gave her strength instead of pain. She remembered the nights she worked late just to pay bills. She remembered walking for hours to save transport money. She remembered skipping meals so her siblings could eat. All those struggles had trained her heart to be tougher than most people could ever understand. Ebel promised herself she would rise, even if she had to start from nothing. She had no riches, no powerful name to lean on, and no support system. But what she did have was courage, and that courage was enough. She knew her family's love was conditional, but her faith in herself could not be taken away. She walked outside and felt the morning air on her face, a new kind of determination settling in her chest. She thought about how easy it would be to sink into bitterness, but she refused to let them destroy her spirit. Instead, she would use the rejection as fuel. The same way fire grows stronger when it faces the wind, she would grow stronger from this humiliation. In her heart, she whispered a vow that she would never forget. She would build a life so powerful that one day, those same people who pushed her aside would have no choice but to see her worth. She would not return to beg for love. She would return standing tall, carrying a story that no insult could erase. Deep inside, Ebel knew she was about to begin a journey that would change everything. Ebel began her new journey quietly, without telling anyone in her family. She knew if they heard about her plans, They would laugh and call her foolish, so she kept everything hidden, carrying her dreams in silence. By day, she took small jobs to earn money, no matter how little. By night, she stayed awake in her small room, teaching herself new skills, writing down ideas, and practicing until her eyes grew heavy. It was not easy, but every hour of hard work felt like a step away from the pain of rejection. At first, nothing seemed to work. She tried one idea and failed. She invested her small savings into something and lost it all. The failures hurt, but instead of stopping, she told herself they were lessons. She studied harder, asked questions from strangers who knew better, and learned from every mistake. Each failure became like a brick, and with every brick, she was building something bigger than anyone imagined. Her family noticed her coming home late and leaving early. They whispered about her, saying she was wasting her life, saying she was chasing dreams that would never happen. Amol joked to others that his sister was busy pretending to be important when, in reality, she had nothing. But Ebel did not argue. She smiled quietly and kept going. She knew talking back to them would not change anything, but proving them wrong would. Little by little, her effort started to take shape. She created a small project, and though it was simple at first, it carried her heart and passion. She treated it like a seed, watering it daily with discipline and hard work. Soon, people outside her family began to notice. They admired her dedication, even if the results were still small. Every kind word from a stranger gave her more strength than the silence of her family ever had. Ebel used every moment to grow. When others slept, she was awake, researching, learning, and trying again. When others wasted time, she was building a path only she could see. She knew no one believed in her, but that was exactly what made her strong. She was no longer waiting for approval. She was building for herself. Months passed, and what began as a secret dream slowly turned into something real. Ebel still lived under the same roof, still heard their gossip, but deep inside she carried a powerful secret. While they mocked her, she was preparing to rise. And when the time came, her steps would shake the same house that once pushed her aside. Months later, life had changed in small but powerful ways for Ebel. Her project was still in its early stages, but it had started to grow roots. She was earning little by little, enough to support herself without begging from anyone. Every day she was learning something new, and though it was still a hidden journey, she felt stronger than ever. What gave her strength was knowing that no one else knew the fire she was carrying inside. One evening she attended a neighborhood party, invited by a distant friend. The place was full of music, chatter, and laughter. People gathered in groups, sharing food and stories. Ebel stayed at the back, quietly enjoying her own company. Then she suddenly heard a familiar voice, her brother Amol. He was standing in the center of a small group, surrounded by friends who hung on his every word. Amol's voice was loud, filled with pride and mockery. "My sister," he laughed. "She is nothing. Jobless and hopeless. She spends her time chasing fake dreams, acting like she's building something. But in reality, she has nothing to show. Just wait, she will soon come back to us begging for food." The group erupted with laughter, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads. The words cut deep, but Ebel did not let her face show it. She stood quietly in the corner, holding her glass, her lips curling into the faintest smile. If Amol had said those things months ago, she would have gone home crying. But today she was different. Today she knew something he didn't. She was no longer hopeless. Inside her heart, she wanted to tell them about the late nights she spent working, about the contracts she was about to secure, about the recognition that was slowly coming her way. She wanted to tell them she was building something they could never understand. But she stopped herself. Their laughter didn't matter anymore. Words could no longer break her, because she had already seen the future she was walking toward. So instead of anger, she let silence be her answer. She smiled quietly, not because the joke was funny, but because she knew the truth of who she was becoming. Amol saw only the present, but she was carrying the future. And soon, that future would speak louder than any cruel joke. That night, Ebel walked out of the party with her head high. The laughter behind her faded, but her determination grew stronger. She knew the day was coming when Amol's words would return to him. Not as a joke, but as his deepest shame. Ebel's life slowly began to shift, though no one around her noticed at first. The project she had started in secret, the same one her family mocked, was finally beginning to show results. What started as small steps turned into something bigger. More people began to notice her work, and her name started to quietly spread among people who valued her talent. Each time she received a small recognition or a message of encouragement, her heart felt stronger. She realized she was no longer walking in darkness. A light was beginning to shine on her path. One day, she received an email from a company that had seen her project online. They wanted to meet her, to discuss a possible collaboration. Ebel stared at the message for a long time, her hands shaking, hardly believing it was real. She prepared carefully, reminding herself that she had built this moment with her own sweat and tears. When she entered the office of the investors, she carried herself with quiet confidence. They listened to her, they asked questions, and for the first time, people who were not family truly valued what she had to say. The investors were impressed. They told her that what she had created had the potential to grow far beyond what she imagined. By the end of the meeting, they offered her a deal that could change her entire life. She signed it with trembling hands, her heart racing, knowing this was the turning point she had been waiting for. With that one agreement, doors opened into a world she had only dreamed of. Her project was no longer just a small idea hidden in her room. It had become a business with strength and recognition. Success began to flow in, and opportunities multiplied. Suddenly, she was attending meetings, networking with important people, and learning lessons about growth that pushed her further. She was earning money she had never seen before, enough to secure her future and protect her independence. But through it all she remained quiet at home. She still lived under the same roof, still heard the same whispers from her family, still listened to Amel's jokes. They had no idea that the hopeless girl had now stepped into a new world of success. Sometimes, Ebel wanted to shout it out, to tell them she had made it, but she reminded herself that timing was everything. The same way a seed grows underground before showing its leaves, she allowed her success to stay hidden until it was strong enough to be undeniable. She worked harder, stayed focused, and smiled to herself every night, knowing the truth. Ebel's life had changed forever, but she waited patiently. She was not rushing for revenge or quick recognition. She was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal herself, the moment when her success would speak louder than all their rejection. While Ebel's life was quietly rising, the story in her parents' house was very different. The same family that once laughed at her now found themselves drowning in problems they could not escape. Her father's small business, which he had always bragged about, started to collapse. Debts piled up one after another, and the money he once used to show off at gatherings was gone. Creditors began knocking at the door, demanding payment, and soon his proud voice grew weaker. Her mother, who had always carried herself like a queen, felt the pressure as well. She could no longer keep up the image she had worked so hard to maintain. The clothes, the jewelry, the constant display of superiority, all of it became harder to afford. Relatives who once respected her slowly turned away when they realized she had nothing left to give. Whispers spread in the community that their family was sinking, and for the first time, her mother avoided gatherings where she once loved to shine. Amel, who used to mock Ebel and laugh at her struggles, was also facing his own downfall. The friends who enjoyed his jokes and parties started disappearing when they saw he had no money to back up his pride. His reckless spending caught up with him, and he could no longer live the way he used to. The people who once surrounded him with laughter now avoided him, leaving him exposed. The house that once felt loud and full of pride turned quiet and heavy. Nights were filled with arguments between their parents about unpaid bills and lost opportunities. The siblings whispered in fear, realizing the comfort they had always known was slipping away. The same family that once looked down on Ebel now desperately searched for someone, anyone, who could rescue them from shame. Her father tried reaching out to old business partners, but no one wanted to risk their money with him anymore. Her mother asked relatives for help, but they only offered excuses. Even close friends who used to sit at their table began to distance themselves, not wanting to be dragged into their troubles. Slowly their pride faded. The family that once stood tall, pointing fingers at Ebel, now found themselves bent under the weight of their own mistakes. They were trapped, struggling to breathe under the pressure of collapsing debts and fading respect. Every day, the walls of their reputation crumbled further. In their hearts, They knew they needed saving, but the bitter truth was clear. No one was coming. Their pride had left them isolated, and the name they once guarded so fiercely was now sinking into dust. The day of the family gathering arrived, and the atmosphere inside the house was tense. Relatives had been invited from near and far because Ebel's parents wanted to discuss their problems and find someone who could help them out of their financial mess. The table that once overflowed with pride now carried only worried faces and whispered conversations. Everyone was waiting, hoping for a miracle. Her father tried to speak with confidence, but his voice trembled as he explained how the debts had grown. Her mother sat beside him, looking smaller than ever, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone who might rescue them. Amal avoided eye contact, embarrassed that the friends he once bragged to now knew the truth. The room carried an air of desperation, and though everyone was seated, it felt like no one had answers. Just as the silence grew heavier, the doors opened. Heads turned immediately and the room froze. Ebel stepped inside, dressed with quiet elegance, her presence commanding attention without her saying a word. For a moment no one moved. It was as though time had paused. This was not the girl they had mocked months ago. This was not the outcast who was told she didn't deserve a seat. This was a woman transformed, walking with the strength of someone who had built herself from the ground up. Whispers spread quickly among the relatives. Some stood to their feet without even realizing it, moved by the power she carried. Others stared in shock, unable to hide their surprise. Slowly, one by one, the family rose from their chairs, not out of habit but out of respect. The very table that once rejected her now waited for her to sit. Ebel's parents stared in disbelief, their mouths slightly open, as if their minds could not process what their eyes were seeing. Amal's usual smirk was gone, replaced by shame. He lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. For the first time in a long while, no one dared to laugh at her, no one dared to question her presence. The room belonged to her now. Ebel walked calmly toward the table. Every step echoed with the silent power of her journey. She did not rush, she did not boast. She simply moved with grace, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced rejection and turned it into strength. When she finally reached the table, the seat that was once denied to her stood waiting. The outcast had returned, not to beg, not to explain, but to be honored. And as she sat down, the entire room knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Her mother's eyes widened as she looked at Ebel, unable to hide the shock on her face. She had not expected her to walk in with such confidence, nor imagined the entire family would rise for her. For a moment, she could not even breathe, watching the daughter she once dismissed now standing as the center of everyone's attention. The woman who once mocked her for being unworthy was now trembling inside, faced with the truth of her own words. Ebel's voice broke the heavy silence, calm yet sharp enough to pierce the room. She looked directly at her mother and said softly, almost like a reminder, "You told me I don't deserve a seat at this table." Her words hung in the air, echoing louder than any shout could have. The family shifted uneasily in their chairs, their eyes moving from mother to daughter, waiting to see what would happen next. Her mother's lips parted as if to defend herself, but no words came out. The truth was too clear. Ebel did not stop there. She leaned slightly forward, her gaze never leaving her mother's face, and added, "Yet now this whole table waits for me." Her tone was gentle, but the weight of her words was undeniable. She was not mocking, she was not bitter. She was simply stating the truth, and that truth struck harder than anger ever could. The room fell into a silence so deep it felt as though even the walls were listening. Every relative who had once laughed at her, every cousin who had whispered behind her back, every uncle who had looked down on her, all of them kept quiet. The clinking of cutlery stopped, the shuffling of feet stilled, and no one dared to interrupt. Her father swallowed hard, looking down at his hands, ashamed of the past that was now catching up with them. Amal, who had always boasted of being the pride of the family, sat frozen, his face pale, realizing that his sister now carried the power he had lost. The same table that had been a symbol of her rejection was now the place of her honor, and no one could deny it. Ebel sat down slowly, her posture calm and steady, as though she had been meant to sit there all along. Around her, heads bowed slightly, some in respect, others in shame. Her mother's eyes glistened, but she could not speak. The silence of the room was her answer. The daughter she once cast out had returned with dignity, and her words had turned the entire table into her witness. Ebel looked around the table, her calm eyes meeting the faces of those who once laughed at her pain. She could see the shame written clearly on them, but she did not raise her voice or boast about her victory. Instead, she spoke with the quiet strength of someone who had walked through fire and come out shining. She explained that she had the power to help where they had failed, but it would not be out of weakness or desperation. It would be on her terms, with her choices guiding the way. The family listened in silence, their pride too broken to argue. They had spent years pushing her aside, never imagining she would be the one they would one day depend on. Now she sat at the head of the table with every eye on her, not as the outcast but as the leader. Her voice carried both authority and mercy, reminding them that she had built her success not from their approval, but from her own determination. Her father lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. Her mother's lips trembled as if searching for words, but none came. Even Amal, who once mocked her openly, sat stiff and pale, realizing that the balance of power had shifted forever. The same sister he had called hopeless was now the only hope for their sinking family name. Ebel did not rub salt into their wounds. She did not list their failures or demand apologies. Instead, she made it clear that helping them would not erase the past, but it would show the world the woman she had become. With a steady hand, she signed the agreement that would cover their debts and save what little dignity they had left. But every condition bore her mark, her terms, her rules, her vision. They were no longer in control. She was. Whispers spread beyond the walls of that room. People began to speak not of the family's downfall, but of Ebel's rise. She was no longer remembered as the girl denied a seat. She was celebrated as the woman who owned the entire table. The world saw her not through the eyes of rejection, but through the light of her strength and grace. As the gathering ended, the family left with bowed heads, weighed down by their shame. But Ebel remained steady, her heart at peace. She had chosen not revenge, but something greater. She had chosen to rise higher than their cruelty. In that moment, her final victory was not just over her family's doubts, but over the pain they had tried to plant in her life.